Hello and welcome to Embracing Change. I'm Ashley Davis Bush and you're listening to Web Talk Radio. Well, so perhaps the biggest change that we will ever face, the ultimate change, is death. When we die, when our loved ones die. It is scary, it is also inevitable, and it's a subject that we often like to avoid. We die, our loved ones die, but the question is, what happens afterwards? What happens beyond death? What happens to our souls? Can any of us really know? My guest, Sandra Champlain, was a skeptic who went on a journey of discovery about life after death. She has researched it, she has learned about it, and she has shared her findings. She's a speaker, entrepreneur, and author of the book We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death. Sandra, I'm so excited you're my guest. Welcome to Embracing Change.
Oh, thank you, Ashley. I am thrilled to be here.
Well, so tell me, Sandra, how on earth did you get interested in this subject enough to research it and write about it?
It's an interesting journey because not in a million years did I ever think I would write a book on it. I was somebody back in 1996 who had a tremendous fear of dying.
And you're not alone in that, Sandra. Do you know that's one of the top fears? I think it's behind fear of dentists.
Oh,
Fear of dying.
do we really fear dentists that much? Oh my goodness. I have a nice dentist. So anyways, yeah, I know I'm not alone in it, but I still couldn't rest at night. Just having a faith, I was raised Catholic, but just faith wasn't enough. So I started on this secret journey of discovery, which, to be honest with you, it was part-time. It was when I had time. It lasted over, I would say, about 15 years. I would keep gathering evidence. And within the first couple of years, actually, my fear had ended and I just wanted more. I wanted more. Someday I thought I would be noble and share it with the world. But the truth is, Ashley, I was scared to death what people would think of me because I used to ridicule people that believed in mediums and psychics and talked that, woo-woo spiritual stuff. That was not me. So very conveniently, I stayed busy with my own life and never shared it.
Because you're right, people judge that. They think it seems weird, kind of out there, fringe. So I can see why you'd be scared.
I used to judge it. I used to walk into a bookstore and go through the spiritual stuff where they had the angel cards and things like that and laugh and be so opinionated that people need to get a real life. This stuff is nonsense. So if I ridiculed it, I knew others would. So fast forward to 2010, my dad gets diagnosed with cancer, and I spend the last 5 months of his life by his side. He passed away May 11th, 2010. And
this is after you've done all these years of reading and talking and thinking about it.
And a little side note is my dad was very Catholic and he went to church every day. I had the courage to tell him about some of these things I had learned about. And I was petrified that he'd think I was, I don't know, doing the devil's work or doing something wrong. But the opposite happened. It brought tears to his eyes and he held my hands and he said, Sandra, promise me you write a book on this.
Oh.
Promise. Now, I made the promise thinking, yes, someday I will. And I did promise him. So I was kind of researching how to write a book. But the grieving process, which I know you help so many people with, hit me so hard that not only was I grieving the loss of my dad, but my relationships with my siblings turned into some of those stories that you read about, the fighting over the will, these and it was not predicted that my family and I would fight this way because, we were loving siblings and there were huge miscommunications and basically I got written off by my siblings. So I couldn't see them, couldn't see their children. So I not only lose my dad, I lose them. And I went through the deepest, darkest place that I've ever been. And
wow. And this is after presumably what you had learned made death seem more less frightening. And yet here you were having this reaction and all these family conflicts.
Exactly. So being the researcher that I am, it's like a little light bulb went off. Maybe these feelings, because they're very real. I mean, anyone who has grieved knows there's actual feelings within the body associated with grief. I mean,
Oh,
not just
yes.
the tears that never stop and the
Oh, it's
aching and the,
it's
I
very
mean,
physical.
very physical. I mean, I remember being buckled over in the shower in just such pain. I couldn't even stand up straight because I was crying so hard. And it's interesting because even thinking about it, it's like all of a sudden I'm starting to get flooded with emotion right now. And it's like, oh,
Mm.
geez, I mean, that's just how we work. But what I decided to do was say, what the heck happens in the grieving body and mind that causes all these reactions? And not just the physical ones, like why does it have to hurt so bad, but why would a good normal family be having such mega miscommunications and arguments and stuff? So,
Yes. So why do you think?
well, what I found out is when we grieve, our chemistry in our brain actually changes. Our healthy neurotransmitters get depleted, which explains a lot for, I mean, because you always hear of, our feel-good endorphins and, serotonin and, things like that. Our feel-good neurotransmitters, but when we grieve, they get depleted, and that's when the anger comes in and the sadness and all these things. But what I didn't realize, and this is why I'm so passionate about this, by the way, is that when our chemistry changes, these neurotransmitters are directly correlated to not only our mood, but also to our memory, our perception, and our communication centers in our brain. So it's likely anyone who's ever grieved knows that your memory stinks. You can't remember if you called somebody, can't remember
Yep.
where you put down the keys.
It's that grief fog, the
It,
fog on the brain.
correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. But there's an actual reason for that because your body's rearranging itself for the impact of the loss and to get used to the new reality. But also the perception is a big one because like I had a conversation with my sister about dad's care before he passed. And as you know, grief can set in before someone passes, not just after.
Yep.
Um,
Anticipatory grieving. Absolutely.
Yes. And so she was really saying I was saying one thing. And I'm like, you're not getting me. I'm saying this.
Mm-hmm.
So her story really made me out to be the bad guy. And I knew she'd report into my siblings that story. And so I stayed with her on the phone until she got my story verbatim, like she got it. And then what story did she tell my siblings? The other one.
Oh my
Now,
goodness.
for so long, I held out that she hates me, she's trying to ruin me, why would she do this to me? But a grieving brain can't perceive and store information properly.
That is
So,
so true. And
yeah,
the resources just leave that that
oh,
area of the
nothing. But you
prefrontal
don't think it,
cortex.
we're still living in our own body and mind, so we don't know that something's off.
Right. It doesn't make sense. But Sandra, what did you learn about life after death?
Well, let me just end the one thought that I had was
Okay.
after I found out what I did about grief, I created a free audio, called it How to Survive Grief, put it on the internet. It went viral fast. 3,000 people in 15 countries heard it just within months of my dad dying. And
Mm.
people started writing me how it eased their pain, how it gave them hope, how it helped their communications. And then people started reporting that it caused them not commit suicide. So
Wow.
that is in that moment that I said, I'm going to fulfill Dad's wish. I'm going to write a book. I'm not going to write a grief book, but if I have the courage to share everything I know about life after death, include one chapter on grief, and then the rest be how to have a powerful life while we're here on planet Earth, that's what
Hmm.
I want to write about. And so finally, it
Well,
came
it's
out.
quite a legacy and a tribute to your father. But tell us,
Life after death. Yes.
what did you
Okay.
learn?
So the first thing, because now I'm the skeptic, right? Skeptic's discovery of life after death. I took a course in mediumship.
Uh-huh.
On one hand, I was bad mouthing mediums. So, I didn't tell a single soul that I was going to take this course. But on the other hand, I'd seen this woman, Doreen Virtue, do a stage show. And she was so accurate with people. And it was
Mhm.
clear people weren't plants in the audience. So I very secretly flew to Laguna Beach, California, and spent a weekend in a course called Medium Mentorship.
Mhm.
And the promise was, by the end of 3 days, you will be someone who can effectively tell the deceased people around others. And I'm thinking, no way. But I had to take the course. And so this is the first thing that opened up my eyes to, Oh my goodness, this is real.
Mhm.
Doreen had us each take a partner. And while she was explaining how mediumship readings were done, she says, we're going to just play with it and we're going to pretend we're mediums just so I can show you how we do it. But don't worry, we're not really going to do it, but this is how you would do it. So she says, everybody grab a partner. I want you to sit down, hold each other's hands and sit knee to knee. She says, imagine there's this invisible energy between your hearts. She says, create it as a safe space, like, you might be in a bubble of pink energy or white energy. Okay, fine. And she says, now ask, is there a deceased loved one that wants to come through? If yes, show your face, tell me who you are. She says it's very conversational. So she says, just for this exercise, I want you to just pretend and I want you to make up somebody because this is how we're going to do it when we
So it
actually
was
do
really
it.
about learning how to get in touch with a spiritual
Exactly.
being. Uh-huh.
So I thought until I decide to go first because I'm very creative. I'm a chef by trade. So, I mean, I can create. I've got a vivid imagination. So I close my eyes and I'd never seen this woman before in my life. So I start telling the story, which is the instruction. And I said, well, I'm seeing a grandfather standing behind you. He's on your right side, which would mean it's your mom's side of the family. He is your mom's father.
And you really saw this?
I'm making it up.
I
As
see.
far as I'm concerned, Ashley, I am making up this whole thing.
Oh
Just like
no.
if you were to picture right now, I don't know, your mom or your dad or somebody, like you can picture them, right? You can,
Yeah.
yeah. And then if I were to say, okay, now imagine them with a purple wig, you could probably imagine that, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Okay, so I'm making up that there's somebody behind her. And so his name is Jan. He's a fisherman in Denmark. I'm just telling the story. He's got a big gap between his front teeth. He died of lung cancer.
Oh my gosh, it's so
Oh yeah.
specific.
Oh, it's very specific. But I'm playing with it because she says anything that just comes to mind, you just say it, just spit it out. And then I said he never told your mom, his daughter, that he loved her while he was alive. He was one of these tough fathers, but never spoke the words "I love you." And so he would like you to tell your mom that he loves her. So I opened my eyes, like, okay, it's your turn. And she's looking at me with tears rolling down her cheeks.
Mm.
Grandfather's name is Jan. He was a fisherman in Denmark. He had the gap between his teeth. He died of lung cancer, and he never told his own daughter that he loved her.
I guess you tapped into something.
How did I get that? Now, me, who doesn't believe in this, suddenly, like, I did that, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that pushed the door open because it was like, and I had 3 days of not doing that 100% of the time, maybe 40, 50% of the time. The
Mhm.
other times it just came as my imagination. And
Mhm.
anybody I worked with did the same thing back to me. So while that rested my fear enough to know, because these people couldn't have been reading my mind because some of the information that they even gave me about my aunt's husband who had passed away, like I didn't know about these things. There are names that we got that I didn't know.
So
Um,
basically, you've just tapped into the reality that
mhm.
when we die, our souls continue to live in some capacity and that we can communicate with those souls even when we're still on Earth.
That is correct. And like that wasn't enough because
That's a lot.
well, yeah, it's a lot, but if I met you back in 2005 and you said, Sandra, who do you see around me? I mean, it's 50-50 guess. And if
Yes.
I was wrong, I wasn't willing to be wrong to have you laugh at me going, that's not true. Like that's fake. You're too general. So I kept my mouth closed and that's when I kept digging as to what else there is. Now there's got to be something else. So I you just tell me when you want to go somewhere else with this, but I
Mm-hmm.
want to just give some of the things that I found. I found a doctor named Ken Ring, who's out west, who studied near-death experiences. And now there's been hundreds of thousands
Oh,
of
yeah.
people
Lots of
that
research on that.
correct. But the skeptic would say, well, when your brain shuts down, you see the light, you might see your relatives, but there's no proof in that. Well, this man, Dr. Ken Ring, went a step further. He interviewed 30 people that were blind since birth. And when they
Mm.
had their near-death experiences, Ashley, they could
Mhm.
see for the very first time.
So that would disprove this idea that their brain that they had never seen in this lifetime.
Exactly. And specifics. One lady could see her husband was wearing his green shirt, and the doctor he was talking to in the waiting room had dropped his pen, and I mean, very vivid accounts. That's one thing. There's Reverend Rita Berkowitz, who is just a phenomenal lady. She's in Massachusetts. She's got the website thespiritartist.com. Now, Rita is a medium. She's been practicing mediumship for 30 years, but she's also an artist. And throughout her website, and also she's got a fun book, The Idiot's Guide for Communicating with Spirits. It's one of my tools in my tool belt.
Yep.
But she draws pictures of who she sees around you, and all throughout her website are actual photographs of the person and what she saw. Very cool. There's something.
Okay, well, actually, we'll have to hear that when we come back because Sandra, we're going to take a break, but
Okay.
I'm very curious when we come back. I'd love to hear you share, knowing that there is a spiritual world beyond this world. How can that influence how we live today? What is that message for transferring it into life on the planet? So we will hear your answer to that when we return. You're listening to Embracing Change on Web Talk Radio. Stay tuned for that information, but first I want to share about a very exciting resource that I know you'll want to hear about. So we'll be right back. Well, I'm very pleased to profile a resource that I think you're going to find of particular interest. What is another one of the biggest changes we might face? Becoming a new parent, and in particular for women, becoming a new mother. Talk about a big change. It changes your identity, your lifestyle, your sleeping habits, your relationships, the way you engage with the world and with someone new in your life to love. It's huge. And so really we all need tools to help manage that transition because it can be so overwhelming and so confusing. Well, I'd like to introduce you to Melanie Strong. She is in Melbourne, Australia. You will notice her beautiful accent. She's a medical practitioner, a counselor, an author of the book Mother Love. She hosts the very informative website wellmomwellbaby.net.au, and she's also the mother of 2 children herself. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Melanie Strong to Embracing Change. Hello.
Thanks, Ashley. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm delighted to have you join me, and I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about the services and resources that you are providing through Well Mom, Well Baby.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess they started when I had my own children, and I realized that the antenatal education didn't really cover much about the emotional aspects of becoming a new parent, mainly the physical aspects. So I set up a workshop which is about the emotional preparation for parenthood, which I offer parents. I do it face-to-face, but I can also do it via Skype and through emails, which offers a range of worksheets, discussions, brainstorming, so that new parents or expecting parents can think about the topics that might come up between them and their partners and their extended family. So it's the emotional issues that are not really dealt with that I deal with in this workshop.
Oh, that's wonderful. And what about with Mother Love? What does that book focus on?
So Mother Love, the full title is Mother Love, Embracing the Ups and Downs of Being a New Parent, is a book that I've written which covers very similar topics to the workshop. So it talks about expectations of being a new parent and how often our expectations are very different to the reality of being a new parent. It talks about all the losses that we experience as a new parent because, often we talk about the joys of parenthood, but it's really important to talk about the fact that there is also a grieving process going on when we become a parent. We lose a part of ourselves, our previous role, how we defined ourselves. There's loss of so many other things, including sleep, time by yourself, time with your partner. So I talk about that grieving process.
That's really interesting because not many people will actually bring that up as a topic, and yet you're right, everything changes and you're closing a door even as you open another, and you need to grieve that.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's often ignored, and it's when that is ignored it goes underground and can turn into something more dangerous, such as postnatal depression. So it's really important to acknowledge that there are those losses.
And do you offer individual one-on-one work as well as the
Yeah,
workshops?
yeah. So I do individual counselling as well. Obviously here in Melbourne, I do it face to face, but I also offer Skype sessions. And that's I talk to mums and dads and cover all the very similar topics. And often the topic of grief does come up and change.
Hmm. And so what, if you could say in a nutshell, what's a simple message that you try to convey to new mums?
A simple message would be that there is a degree of flexibility that can be helpful in your thinking. So, often the romanticized version of parenthood that you expect is not what you get when you're in it. And it's about embracing the change, both the positives and the negatives, and coming through it with as much support as possible. Often, in this day and age, family is spread far and wide, and it can be hard to rally that social support. So
Hmm.
accepting the ups and downs and trying to get as much support as possible with this transition into parenthood.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Melanie, because I think that you're exactly right. When you're involved in a major change, you basically want to gather as much information and support as you can. And wellmomwellbaby.net.au does exactly that. So thank you for telling me about what you offer.
Thanks for having me, Ashley.
All right. And now back to embracing change. Welcome back to Embracing Change on Web Talk Radio. I'm Ashley Davis Bush, and I'm talking with Sandra Champlain, a speaker and author who spent 15 years researching life after death and who says that we don't die. So Sandra, when you've done all this research, you've found the truth that spirits live on, that there is something beyond this world. How does that change the way you're living your life and I should live my life?
Ashley, there's three main fears that all of us humans have. We have the fear of dying, we have the fear of being alone, and we have the fear of failure. So if we do not fear dying, if we really embrace that we don't die, first of all, there's fear number one. We don't die. Our personality goes on. That you that loves to laugh, that loves to learn, that loves to love, that loves to play, you go on. We go on. And I always share this. We cannot see the radio waves that are connecting us right now. We can't see the wireless internet. We can't see GPS signals or whatever is emanating from our cell phones that allow so much communication. But this invisible world is real. So I say heaven or the hereafter is in that same invisible place, and your loved
Mhm.
ones are around. So
So even though our bodies die, because our bodies clearly do
clearly.
die, and
Mhm.
we exit our bodies, that the essence of us, the essential self, that is what lives on.
That lives on, and if you want to put it in scientific,
Hmm.
language, that would be energy. Everything is
Hmm.
made up of energy. It's not any woo-woo stuff. If a log burns, yes, the log disappears, but the energy survives as heat. So when our bodies die, the energy that we are is still vibrating, is still somewhere. And like I
Hmm.
said, in this invisible world. But to answer your question, if we're so afraid of failure and we don't die, well, then we could never really fail. Our life here is all an education for our soul. We learn, we grow, there's not a single one of us that can't look back into our past, no matter how bad things may have happened or how good they might have happened. All of it makes us who we are today. So
Hmm.
there's the fear of
Hmm.
failure. And the other fear, being alone. Well,
We're
if we
not
don't
alone.
die,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and I don't think we're being stalked by our deceased loved ones either. There's a woman who wrote a book, Do Dead People Watch Me in the Shower? And I think that's perfect because that's a question that,
That's
if
funny.
we don't, are they always around? No, I think that, when we pass over or go into the hereafter, wherever you want to call it, there's learning to be done, there's lessons, but it can be as quick as a thought away and they're here when you need them.
What do you think of the movie that's just come out, Heaven is for Real?
I think it's awesome.
Mm.
I read the book,
Hmm.
and there's so much from children having these memories, having these visions, having these thoughts. I think we all know that each one of us has this little negative voice, this inner critic that's always talking in our heads, whether we're fat enough or too fat or ugly or too many gray hairs or too many wrinkles or
Yeah,
whatever
it's
that
that
negative
that
stuff.
critical voice.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And as kids, that hasn't developed yet. So there is more of a openness and intuition, a seeing. And I think it's really cool. There's just been one of my other things in the whole expedition is Dr. Ian Stevenson interviewed 3,000 children and actually kids talking about their past lives, and they were specific, and people actually existed that they spoke of. So there's something within children that they can see through the veil, if you want to call it that, and very often they've seen people that you and I can't see, and they know things. So I think it'll do a lot of good to raise the awareness. And there's so many people, Ashley, that I think actually do believe in life after death and have actually had a weird experience, whether it's a dream or something, but we're too afraid to share it because, again, it's like, what will people think? So this movie, I think, will get people talking. And I
Yes.
will be.
Yes, and there have been, there's the Proof of Heaven. That book's very popular,
Neurosurgeon.
right? Yep,
Yep.
Eben. So it's like the information is out there, but yet we still fear death, and it seems like when you make a study of it, as you did, the proof is incontrovertible, and it really changes the way you see your own life and your own potential death.
And I just don't think enough people yet, like the tipping point hasn't occurred where people believe in it. I mean, thousands of years ago, people used to believe the earth was flat. I mean, there wasn't even a question because they knew it was flat. And so many of us believe, well, life after death, nah, we just die and we die.
So you have no doubt anymore?
None.
And are you afraid?
I'm afraid of suffering is what I'm afraid of after I saw my dad die. And I don't have that in perspective of why, even if we don't die, and I understand negative things happen in our life and we learn, but I don't have a handle on why the suffering has to hurt so much. So when it's my time to cross over, like that's question number one. Is how come? I mean that I don't have a grips of, and
because what is the purpose of that?
Yeah, I don't know, and I know my dad was very Catholic, and there is some quotes in the Bible about those who suffer the most are seated closest to Jesus, and so I read that to him over and over and over. There's people that say karma, and it's hard to buy into that when you see a kid suffering. I don't want anybody to think I have all the answers, but I've touched on enough things that I know it, and I want to encourage your listeners to. First of all, thanks for listening. But my website, wedon'tdie.com, has that grief audio that I was talking about, plus the first couple chapters of my book, and a whole bunch of other free stuff that we can't get to it all in this interview, but you use it, and it's
absolutely
no cost. And
we will send people to that.
Yeah,
for sure.
Thanks.
And you bring up the grief piece, so let's go there, because as you mentioned, I work with a lot of grievers, and I have found that those who feel that there's some connection to a spirit that's living on, they definitely have an easier time with their grief, because basically it just blows open this possibility of connection and the sense that love doesn't die, and the connection and the relationship doesn't die either.
It is amazing. There's a woman that got a copy of my book. She had lost her husband. They were married 46 years. She had locked herself in her house in upstate New York. Her daughters had bought her a copy of We Don't Die, and she says, I don't want that thing in my house. I don't believe in that. I'm not going to read that. Well, strategically, they left it in the house. The woman has read it. She's now out of the house. She's country line dancing. She has conversations with her husband at her kitchen table, trusting he's still there. She's got the distinctions around grief, understanding why we're prone to feel guilty, why we're prone to think the same thoughts. Well, what's happening inside our brain that brings sadness. I give tools to help
Right.
release some of that. And by using that and understanding, like, grief is not our fault. We can't wake up and say, today I'm not going to grieve. It's not how it works, as you
No,
know.
it's part of being in the body and having a human experience.
Right. But by understanding that and also really getting that her husband isn't gone,
Do you,
it's a whole different kind of
a
life.
whole different perspective. So do you communicate with your father?
Not often. It's interesting. As much as I believe it and know it and I'm sharing it, it's like sometimes I don't take my own advice, which is the truth. But
Mm,
there are moments that I'm having a tough day and I'm sitting on the couch and I just feel him sitting next to me, holding my hand. And it's interesting because my little sign, whether it's really him or whether it's my imagination, and this may sound silly, but is if I can tell what he's wearing. So if
hmm.
I try to imagine, say, my mom with the purple wig, like, I really have to do some work. But if I see my dad sitting next to me, it's like, oh, he's got his khaki pants on, he's got his red polo shirt on, he's got his, silver glasses, and he's got his deck shoes on. Like, I can see it. And it's like
Yeah.
my imagination, but I can see it. And then when I go to bed at night, and even when I wrote the book, I was pretty clear that I'm just going to be a messenger on this, like, let's let it all out. I've got a big mouth. I am afraid a lot, but I am courageous too. What do I need to say? And so I asked my dad, like, dad was a huge giver. And it's like, what needs to be in this to make as much of a difference? So I just kind of trusted that some of the words were mine, some were his, some were, who knows?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
so I guess I am, yeah, but not as often
You
as
are, you are. It sounds like you definitely are. And I'm sure he's very proud of your work and how you've shared this with others. Because basically, I think one of the biggest fears that you mentioned, the fear that we're alone, and this idea that we're really not alone. We're surrounded by spirits. We're supported by spirits, and that what we see is only a tip of the iceberg. There's so much that we can't see, we can't prove, we can't know. So why not keep your mind open? Because I'm thinking of people listening and saying, nah, but it's almost like what do you have to lose to keep your mind open to this?
Well, and that little voice that says, nah, that's that inner critic. I mean, we are so hard on ourselves, and we could write down all these things we think about ourselves. Like, so for me, I'm too fat, I'm still single, I'm 48, nobody's ever going to love me, I'm unlovable, all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I could write down a whole sheet of paper of what the inner voice is saying about me. Now, if I ask 20 people in my life, you know what they're going to say? Oh my God, you're beautiful, you're so funny, you're so motivating, you've inspired me, totally opposite from what my own voice says.
Yeah,
But now who's telling the truth? It's actually the 20 people.
that's
So
right.
it is. It really is. We are so hard on ourselves. And I think there's this, one of the reasons we don't believe that we're more than just our bodies is because we have this voice that's constantly reminding us and keeping us small. And the only thing we can do is, we hear about meditation, we hear about quieting the voice, being in the present moment. All those kind of things actually just put that voice aside and can get you in touch with who you really are. And so, yeah, autopilot, we're all going to say, nah, that's not true. I still say it. But it's like, is that me saying it, or is that just that inner critic?
Well, and also we live in a world that's very form-based, and we look at images where we believe in form. We are very hard on our own bodies and judging, and
Right.
just we want to touch and see. That's all we believe in.
Mhm.
But as soon as you sort of let go of that, and as you say, enter stillness and try to listen to the real voice, the voice of a higher calling, a higher vision of ourself, then we tap into something more.
We tap into not only when we go there, but we're free from pain, even if it's a few moments when we're present, we're free from pain. That's when those psychic things hit. That's moments right before you fall asleep, or if you're kind of zoning out, driving in a car and you see your loved one sitting next to you that's deceased, or just before you fall asleep at night. Some of the greatest inventions and most magnificent songs and pieces of artwork and things were created. The artist would say, when my mind was quiet, I got the thought. So we
Hmm.
really connect with things. And then also in my book, I talk about something called remote viewing, which is an ESP technique that I teach people to do. And I do that on purpose because if you have a magazine in front of you that you've never opened and you are able to quiet your mind just using a few steps and have a notepad in front of you and you play the game, kind of like I played the game with the medium reading,
Mm-hmm.
if I could see what pictures were in this magazine, what would they be? And your brain will start throwing images out. Well, you start writing them down on a piece of paper. And in about 15 minutes, you turn back into that magazine and you start looking at the pages. Most of the things you just wrote down are actually pictures within those pages.
Hmm.
It is so mind-blowing that...
That is. Well, you're basically tapping into
Yes.
a different kind of energy field, as you were talking about energy. Wow, well, this is all so fascinating. And Sandra, our time just flew, but we do have to wind up our conversation. And I just want to thank you so much for being my guest on Embracing Change.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all the difference you make in so many lives, because trust me, you never know the difference you've made in so many lives, Ashley. So thanks for all the giving you do.
Oh, thank you, Sandra. Well, so think about that because embracing change is involving something bigger, something more, something beyond what you can see, something beyond form. We are all going to die, our bodies at least, and be open to the possibility that there is something more because it affects our life now and our connection to those we love. So tune in to the next edition of Embracing Change when you'll hear another fascinating discussion about, yes, change. Remember, change is inevitable whether it happens to you or you make it happen. Embracing change is a critical life skill to help you live with courage and choose peace. Till next time, I'm Ashley Davis Bush and you're listening to Web Talk Radio.